Well, welcome to Journey. My name is Jamie. I'm one of the pastors here. We're thrilled to have you with us. And those of you who are in the overflow, whether you're out front, out back, in the room, or watching online, somewhere in Alaska, welcome. We're thrilled to have you. And by the way, update, everything's going along great, so we're hoping to break ground before the year's out and start moving dirt and changing building structures. And so we'll have hopefully a little bit more space, and we're really, really excited about that. But for those of you who are just living in the inconvenience of it all, thank you for helping us out. And as we said when we first moved into here, sometimes, it's a little squished, it's a little intimate, but sometimes that's a pretty good reflection of life. Life is inconvenient. So we just want to model that for you here on Sundays. We're in a series called The Storyteller, and the storyteller is about Jesus, who is just this amazing storyteller, and he tells all these wonderful stories, and so many stories, in fact, that we could have been here for honestly all year long just going through all of his stories. So when we kind of parceled out which stories we're going to tell, we focused on there were kind of two criteria in particular that we kind of settled on. One, what are some of the stories that people don't really talk about a lot, or maybe if you've grown up in the church, maybe we didn't hear a lot about. So, like for instance, a couple weeks ago we did a story called The Clever Chief Operations Officer, which is kind of an odd story. Well, let's talk about some of those odd ones. And then also, maybe let's talk about some of the stories Jesus told that we're familiar with, but maybe we have a misperception, or maybe there's something about how this story has been interpreted through the years that we miss something. And is there some way we can kind of take another run at it and see if there might be something else there to mine? And there's always treasure in these stories. Great storytelling. You can hear stories over and over again and kind of gain some new insight each time. And that certainly is the case with Jesus. So we're reading from Luke chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. In a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared about what people thought. And there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with the plea, "Grant me justice against my adversary." For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, "Even though I don't fear God or care about what people think, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice so that she won't eventually come and attack me." And in some interpretations there, it's that she won't come and give me a black eye. It's kind of almost like a boxing reference, like this woman is annoying me so much I think I'm going to have an anxiety attack. So yes, I will just grant her plea so she'll stop being so annoying. And the Lord said, "Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth?" So, a couple quick references to the context of this story. First of all, in the Old Testament, there's a king called Jehoshaphat, and from his time forward, when it came to being a judge in Jewish culture, the first thing you're meant to think through is, what will God think? So you're meant to judge from a place of recognizing there's a divine authority. So in the story, you immediately have this judge who doesn't care what God thinks. It's very unusual. And he also doesn't care what people think. And so it seems that you have someone who's just fairly apathetic. Then you have this contrast. You have this widow who is in desperate need. She's, in this case, she's in desperate need for justice. She's looking for some right to come from some wrong. And again, I've shared with you this the last few weeks, but in that culture, it would not have been unusual at all that a woman might have lost her husband to death. And your average age in those days was probably 40, 45 years old. People didn't live till they were 80 or 90, right? So it's not unusual that they get an illness or something happens, they die. And it's not unusual that those who were corrupt might get together, tax collectors, some of the religiously elite, and go, here's an opportunity for us to steal some land. It's a land grab. Let's raise some taxes on this widow. We know she's got no way to cover it. She'll wind up putting the home into foreclosure. We can come and steal the land. She'll have nothing. It's not unusual. That kind of thing happened all the time. So there was great injustice done toward widows. And so then the widow would be destitute. She's got nothing. So this woman has no leverage. She has no leverage to get anyone's attention. She doesn't know somebody. She doesn't have any money. She has no clout. What does she have? She decides, I have persistence. I know how to be annoying enough that I will get this man's attention. And that's what she does. And what's important here is that we see what Jesus is saying, because this is one of those stories that if we're not careful can be interpreted the wrong way. For instance, let's talk about what the story is not about. This message of this story is not about feverishly begging God in your prayer for something that you want, and if you do, if you're persistent enough, eventually God will grant your request. I don't believe that's what the passage is about. And I've got a reference from the Old Testament that I think reinforces this. We got a story in the Old Testament about a guy named Elijah. I told this story, I think, sometime last year. But there's this moment where you have this false religion, and they worship this god called Baal. And then you have Elijah, and he's saying we need to turn our attention toward God. And Elijah constructs a competition. They both build altars, and they're both going to have a sacrifice. And he says, you ask your God to rain down fire from heaven. I'll ask my God to rain down fire from heaven. Let's see who wins. The Baal worshipers, basically, from morning all the way through noon, pray, self-mutilate, chant, and continue in their persistence. God, Baal God, please bring fire, please bring fire, please bring fire, please bring fire. And they do it all morning long and nothing happens. Elijah prays to the God of heaven. He says, would you bring fire? It's incinerated. That's the story. In this persistence thing, is there something about being persistent? Yeah, I think there's a message here about persistence. But the issue is not on our side in our action. The issue is, who is God? If we're not careful, we can read this story and go, well, God is like the unjust judge. In other words, God generally doesn't care. But if you'll annoy him enough, he'll give you what you want. If we're not careful, there's a subtle misperception of God. I've even heard people say along the way, well, God's got so busy, he's so busy, there's a lot of other people in the world, he doesn't really have time for me. Like, wow, like your picture of God is kind of small. Because if he's God, I'm pretty sure he doesn't have a master calendar. The Trinity's not an iCal, like, well, let's see. You got Alaska, I got Georgia. I don't know why Alaska keeps coming up. You got Georgia, I'll take care of Iraq. I mean, like, there's not a master calendar on, like, he's God, fully himself, omniscient, omnipresent. And so if you believe that God generally doesn't care and he's preoccupied with other things, then you might interpret this story as, I need to be persistent because God is just not really that attentive. Instead, what this parable is really about is about trust. Remember a couple weeks ago when I told you Jesus was using a rabbinical technique that was referred to by the Jews as from light to heavy? It's essentially, in an English Bible, it comes up and it says, how much the more? Jesus is going, if this is what an unjust judge will do for someone who's persistent, what will the God of the universe do if you persist? He's essentially saying, I don't know if this works, but if a McDonald's hamburger will give you some sustenance, imagine what would happen at Whole Foods. I'm trying to give you some kind of contrast because Jesus is saying, how much the more? It's a teaching technique of contrast, going, yes, persist in prayer, but not because God is just generally disenchanted, disconnected, and annoyed, but because he actually has the entire universe at his disposal and beyond. The question for us when we hear the story, I really believe, is what do you believe about God? And what do we do when God seems silent? Because the challenge for the widow in this story was, hey, I'm not getting anywhere. I keep asking, but I'm getting no resolve. There's no resolution. I keep showing up, but what I want has not become reality. 2 Peter 3:9 says this, "The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness." We are in time and space. God is not. In our time, we're eternal beings, right? But we're trapped in time and space in this earthen vessel. That's how we know our dimensional reality. We have a reality that's beyond that, but it's our limitation. When we go, God, I've been praying about this for days. I've been praying about this for weeks. I've been praying about this for years. Why are you so slow? It's all about perception. And Peter's saying, the Lord's not slow in keeping his promise. It's your limitation in time and space that understands slowness. Right before this, he says, "For with God, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like one day." There's much more happening in another dimensional reality than you can possibly understand as you pray. So you keep showing up, you keep being persistent, you keep praying. Just hold the outcome loosely. Because there's something happening simply in the act of praying. How many of you have had a great difficulty in your life and found that it's caused you to pray more? Most of us. It was actually the challenging thing, the difficult thing in our life that pressed us into intimacy with God. You remember what I shared with you, something Tim had said a few weeks ago, that sometimes we pray, God, remove my pain, remove my struggle, remove the difficulties in my life because I really want to live without you. It's kind of sometimes, we're not saying that, but it's what's underneath our prayer. If you could resolve all the tension in my life, that'd be great because then I don't have to trust you anymore. And I could just rock and roll on my own. And the very thing that's creating the tension, that the lack of resolution, the thing you want resolution for, is actually the thing that's holding the two of you in connection. And so God may be answering your prayer, but in a completely different way than you understand. God, I really want this relationship to work. I really want this thing. And he's going, well, actually, I'm bringing you back to me so that this relationship would work. I shared with you earlier last year, I actually for most of last year, I had some back pain. I hurt myself working out and just struggled all year long, especially in the beginning. And there were moments that I felt great despair. One, on a flight in particular. You know how they have the faces, like what's the face that tells you how much your pain is in? I was like, can you add a face at number 11? Because whatever was like puking and crying at the same time and weeping like a child, I have that pain. I was in the back of an airplane, and it was in the back. Unfortunately, the stewardess was very, very kind. But I just thought, I'm not going to make it through this flight. And I remember I'm back there wincing and praying, going, God, would you take away this pain? It hurts so bad. There's this great focus and sense of despair. I'm like, this is supposed to happen at my age. I'm really old. I'm going to have to ask my kids to tie my shoes. I had some despair moments. I'm never playing basketball again. I had all these things. And there was a great deal of my energy and my focus that was going into this because this physical pain was representing something for me. And was it really about my back? Actually, it was about much more than that. I think one of the things that happens in prayer is this. Sometimes we actually don't know what we want. We go, God, I've been asking you for what I want. And I think sometimes God says, I want you to persist in prayer because I actually don't think you're there yet. God, I really want you to fix my back. I feel some despair about the pain of my... You feel despair about your back? Yeah, it's about my back. Is it really about your back? Well, talk about that despair. Okay, it's fear. What are you afraid of? That I'm not going to be able to play sports. So you really are that obsessed with sports? No. What is it that you're really afraid of? I'm not going to be able to connect with others. So what we're really talking about here is a fear of connection. When you do this, I know there's probably something else. So I want to be known. I want intimacy with my friends and family. I want closeness. And one of the ways that happens is through play. And is it that? Anything else? Yeah, I guess maybe in my true identity, I'm the light of the world, and I want to somehow give love and receive love. And right now, I'm making up that this back pain is going to prevent me from that. Is that true? Well, probably not. So what is it that you want? I want to be the light of the world. Oh, okay, you are. Oh, well, what about my back? These are my prayer times, by the way. Because I think sometimes I don't really know what I want. I'm telling them what I want. I have some discomfort, so make that go away. But I really actually want something much, much deeper. And when I have feelings of despair or anxiety, it's because of fear. And what I think sometimes is silence is just going, yeah, you're not there yet. Get clear. What is it exactly that you want? Richard Rohr says this: religion is lived by people who are afraid of hell. Spirituality is lived by people who have been through hell. That's pretty good. When we're afraid, and that's really what I'm afraid of. God, you're going to keep me in Gehenna on the back of a plane. You're going to keep me in it. This feels like hell. The pain, it hurts. What are you afraid of? Well, it's going to create disconnection. I can't do this. What are you afraid of? When we go to prayer, get clearer. Great human beings are made when everything is against you. To live the widow's faith may be some of the most difficult and necessary work that we do. Because to stay in motion is the hard thing to do when the world seems against us. But we're to pray always, and we're not to lose heart. We're to take the next step. We're to do the next right thing. How many times when you feel like you're in darkness, you feel like you're numb, or you feel like you're stuck, the most important thing you can do is the next right thing. Why is that so important? Well, that was the very last line in the story. When Jesus was revealed, the question is, how many are going to walk in faith? How many are going to trust? Walking in faith is just stepping into your unknown. Some of you got up this morning, and that was your step of faith. Some of you being here in church, especially if you've come from a situation where you got wounded in a church experience, just walking through the doors of something called a church building was painful, was difficult. You were stepping into the unknown. If you're a guest with us, you had to go through the whole awkward, like going to a church for the first time, and you walk in, and you're like, how do I get to where they gather? How do I drop my kids off? This is always awkward. And you got to go through that whole thing. You're stepping into the unknown. It's a step of faith. We do actually have steps of faith all the time, but it's the intentionality. Thomas Aquinas says this: every choice is a renunciation. Every choice is a renunciation of another choice. So the truth is, we're making value exchanges all day long. We're making choices. Do you choose to step in faith? If you're stuck right now, there's something you're like, I don't know what to do about my career. I'm not sure what to do in this marriage. I'm not sure what to do in this relationship. I'm not sure what to do financially. You're in this stuck place. And you feel like, I wish God would make it abundantly clear. Would God put, wasn't there a story in the Bible where a hand started writing on the wall? I've been praying for that. I just need a hand to appear on the wall and tell me what to do. You're in that stuck place. When you lack the clarity, you stay in faith, you stay in motion, you do the next right thing. You go, well, what if I don't know what to do? Well, there are some general universal principles. There are some elements of our identity that you do know. You're the light of the world. You're the love of God. You're carrying the love story. So get out of bed, put your shoes on, and go walk around a store and smile at somebody, or give someone a big tip today. Trust me, that would convey value If you don't know what else to do, just go to a store and give someone a $100 tip. I'll bet they smile. I'll bet you would have conveyed some value, that they would have felt loved, they would have felt cared for, they would have felt seen. Look for a way to convey value. Just stay in motion. Act. Every choice is a renunciation. You're choosing, you can choose this action or you can choose this action. You can binge on Netflix and numb. That's fine. No condemnation. But that's your choice. And when you chose to do that, you chose that instead of this. Just know that. Just accept that. Every choice is a renunciation. It's a choice to do choice not to do something else. We often don't fully know the will of God. But prayer is a little bit like setting the sails and trusting the wind. You're bringing what you do know. Now, it's not unusual at all that we don't know what we want. So that's why I'm saying another reason to persist is in that time of prayer to get clear about what exactly it is you want. But it's really important we understand this about the story. Persistence in prayer has nothing to do with currying favor with God, but it has everything to do with narrowing our focus and getting clear about our desires. And trusting that He is good. He is our eternal source. And the process of not knowing is often doing something in you. I love this. Tony Robbins, of all people, says this. It's so good. It's a behavioral thing. He says, people aren't lazy. They simply have impotent goals. You're not lazy. You just don't have a good enough reason to get out of bed. Your kid who's playing video games, it's not that they're lazy. They just don't have a better goal currently in their life. Change their goals. Give them a goal that says, I'm getting up to go do that instead. Every choice is a renunciation. So if you go, I don't know, I kind of feel apathetic right now in my life. I don't know, I kind of feel a little lost. But get some better goals. Get clear about your desires. And the desire of your true self, your true identity, not your ego self. Who am I? Who has God created me to be? And what could that be like? How can I take my one life today, not for the next 20 years? How do I take my one life? That's where we get paralyzed too. You're like, well, I don't know what He wants me to do for the rest of my life. What? Talk to a millennial. Their world changes every 3 minutes. And I love that about you millennials, by the way, because you're like, I'm not worried about the next 20 years. I'm going to have 10 jobs between now and then. Who cares? Some of us older people, we're way hung up on like the long term. What does God want for you today? If you're stuck dealing with depression, any of those things, and I'm not talking about the clinical kind, there's a lot of ramifications of that. I'm talking about you go, I just feel depressed, I feel apathetic, I feel stuck. God, what do you want today? Just today. Who am I in you, and how am I meant to be the light of the world? And ask Him, and be persistent in asking. Human momentum is forward motion with emotion. It's forward motion, and then it begins to carry emotion with you. If you're enthusiastic and passionate, or if you're not, your nervous system will adjust either way. You know that? Oh, I'm just really apathetic. Your nervous system's going to be like, okay, apathetic. Play the apathetic song. If you go, oh man, I really feel some enthusiasm. Your nervous system's like, okay, play the enthusiasm soundtrack. Like your nervous system is adjusting to your belief. Just so you know, physiologically. So get up and get the ball in motion. I'm going to give you an example. Those of you who went bowling with your kids before they invented I have 4 kids, the twins, when we took them bowling before they invented that nice little thing where the ball goes down the rack and whoo. It was also before the guardrails, that you put up for the kids. I mean, now it's like, what's bowling? I mean, it's just aim the thing. Anyway. So when the twins were little, they were like 3 years old, there were no rails and there was no thing. So what happened? You had to get up to help your kid, right? So we first of all, you had to carry the bowling ball for him. We get to the end of the deal, and my back worked then, so I could I put the ball down there, and I have Jordan or Tyler, and I'd say, "All right, son," and they're like, they could pretty much stand right here, and I'd go, "All right, so put your 2 hands behind the ball, and you're just gonna push the ball down and just push it," and they're little cute little kids, miss them being 3. Usually they'd punch each other in the face a few times, but then they just put the 2 hands behind the ball, push the ball. That was exhilarating, just to watch a very large ball going down a oily strip. And do you know the sound? Thump, thump, thump. It is really a terrible sound because you're like, oh, we're going to be here forever. How much is this lane costing me? Thump, 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 thump. And then, again, there's no guardrails for us, so usually it was like in the gutter. But they were 3. They didn't know. They're like, wow! What happened? With a boy, this is a good word picture for some of you. Some of you just got to get up, squat, stick your butt in the air, get your hands out, push the ball. Because once that thing gets moving, there's motion. You just got to get in motion. Some of you are stuck because you just don't do anything. And this is the issue of faith. This is the issue of persistence. This is actually quite practical. Who is God? Do you believe he's trustworthy? If so, get up and do something related to who you are in him. If you don't have but God, he's got this one person for me in my life that I'm going to marry, and I'm waiting for Tinkerbell to do the dust and the music to play. And I'm just going to tell you, I don't believe that. There's lots of people to marry. Pick one. Trust me, it's going to be glorious bliss and in painful hell. Whichever person you pick. Pick somebody. You're 35. Pick somebody. Sorry, I'm gotta stay focused. That's marriage. Oh, there's so many things I want to say right now. I'm looking at my notes. Jesus does so many things. Okay, you get the point. Jesus does not ask us to do what we cannot do. He has gone before us in all these things. He does not ask us to go where he has not already been. And I think a lot of times in his story there are these hidden meanings in him, and a lot of times there's meanings about him. He's telling stories, and it's really a setup for how he is going to set as a model. He's going to exemplify how the very thing he's talking about becomes a reality. And I don't think it's a stretch to really see that in many ways he's the archetypal widow. He is the person who is persistently coming and asking. He's the person who keeps showing up. He's the person who has been stolen from. He is the outcast. Everybody wants to ignore him, but he keeps showing up. He comes and essentially is bringing justice to the world, but he has to do his own surrender of his will. He's 100% man and 100% God, and yet that man part has to surrender to the divine in him. Has to surrender to his divine Father. Do you remember the moment in the Garden? In the Garden of Gethsemane? And if you have a picture of Jerusalem, you can imagine kind of the Temple Mount. There's a valley called the Kidron Valley, and then there's the garden. You literally, from the garden, you can look down on the Temple Mount, and you can see all the things that are happening in Jerusalem. It's set up on the side of a hill. He goes to the garden. This is the night before his arrest and crucifixion. He goes to the garden. He asks his disciples to come. I don't think this is lost on us that they fell asleep. And he does the work of having to do some renunciation. Every choice is a renunciation. He does the work of having to surrender his will. And he's saying, God, is there any other way? Is there any other way? Do I have to absorb the condemnation, carry the sins of the world, go through this experience, this brokenness between us? Is there any other way? And God's saying, no, this is the way. And Jesus is modeling for us what it means to surrender his will. Hebrews chapter 5 is reflecting on this experience with Jesus, and it says this: during the days of Jesus' life on earth, He offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverent submission. We're talking about a persistent widow who is persistent, who just keeps praying. We're talking about the Son of God who has fervent cries and tears. He just kept praying. And ultimately, his was a spirit of submission. Not my will, but thine. Son though he was, even Jesus learned obedience. Somehow in his willingness, he chose an alignment with the Father. Said, I'm praying so that I will stay tuned into what your will is for my life. Because if I don't pray, commune with the Father, be present with God, and we could go through a whole thing on what prayer is. There's lots of different ways to pray. It's being silent, it's listening, it's hearing, it's meditation, it's speaking, it's petition, intercession, thanksgiving. There's lots of different ways to pray. But it's the action of prayer, communing with God, giving your attention and your focus to the Holy One. It's in this action that we align, the Son though he was, he learned perfect obedience from what he suffered. So there was a process of suffering that actually taught him something. And once made perfect, having surrendered his will, the earthen vessel, he became the source of eternal salvation. And it is now through Jesus that we can align into the kingdom of heaven. He laid the groundwork. He set the example. He modeled for us going through a season of suffering and yet being fervent, and yet being persistent, and ultimately surrendering, submitting to what he believed was the ultimate source of good, God the Father. He surrendered the lower will of his flesh for the higher will of God. And the message for all of us is don't fall asleep, children. Pray. Pray. If you're stuck and apathetic and you feel like your spiritual life is dry, pray. Pray. Every choice is a renunciation. Just choose to pray. Don't give up praying. And realize that each time you do, whether you realize it or not, your desires are getting clear and you're becoming more and more aligned with the divine will of the Father. I didn't read you the opening line, but Luke, as he records this story, actually sets a prologue to the story in Luke 18:1. And this is what it says. Then Jesus told his disciples a story, a parable, to show them that they should always pray and not give up. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says this: seek God, not happiness. This is the fundamental rule of all prayer or all meditation. If you seek God alone, guess what? You'll find that happiness. Would you pray with me? Let's do some contemplation. Let's create some time of prayer. We're talking about prayer. Let's leave some space for it here before we sing. Would you put both feet on the floor, just to set yourself in your chair, just a posture for reflection. Bow your heads, close your eyes, stare at the floor, whatever helps you focus. And I want you to consider this last line from Bonhoeffer, who, by the way, died just weeks before the end of World War II. He was thrown in jail by Hitler because he was a German pastor. A man who suffered, but a man who continued to pray. Life is all about perspective. Do we see through the lens of the kingdom, or we see through the lens of the world? Would you reflect on this statement? What does it mean to seek God instead of seeking first your own relief from pain or your own personal happiness? What does it mean to seek God? After thinking about it and considering it, would you talk to God about that? Just talk to Him. This is prayer. Second thing, what would it look like for you to be persistent in prayer before the ultimate source of good, a divine being who passionately loves you? Would you consider that? What would it look like to be persistent in prayer? And then would you talk to God about that? Consider this question. Listen for a possible answer. What is it that you really want? What is your deepest desire? Now peel that back. Imagine the Spirit saying, but what do you really want? What do you actually desire? Is there something underneath that desire? And keep doing that till you can get to the core desire of your soul. And now what's one step of faith that you could take to experiencing that as reality? Not 100 steps, just one. What's one step of faith that would acknowledge God as trustworthy? I'm going to pray for us, pray over us. If it would help you to write that down, or just meditate on that one action. And then we're going to sing our prayer to God. This is praying. We are in prayer together, you with your brothers and sisters. Singing songs is an aspect of prayer. This is us being obedient, responding to the encouragement of the Father. So God, here we are in this space. We're being persistent. We're displaying a trust with our hands open, sometimes in the air, sometimes in our lap, even in our posture, saying we surrender and we submit to you. God, most of us have tried it on our own. The false self leads us to hell and fear. But your Spirit is ever carrying us into belonging, acceptance, and love. And so, Father, here we are in prayer before you, listening to your voice, setting the sail in our faith. Would your Spirit be the wind, carry us where we're meant to go. Help us become who we're meant to be. And in these moments, this moment, allow us to enjoy your presence. We sing of your love in Jesus' name.